Okay, so picking up where we left off with the bone cells, I just want to check and make sure the microphone is working. It appears to be, camera's working, so we're good to go. All right, so bone is a dynamic tissue, continuously changes. Bone is broken down for their raw materials to build new bone. Three types of bone cells are responsible for the dynamic nature of the bones. That is the osteoblast. And remember from our previous lectures, we know that the BLAST, the blast, when associated with a cell, means an immature cell. The osteocytes, the CYTE, refers to those cells that are mature. And then osteoclast, a clast cell is one that has started to break down. It has reached its zenith and it is now on the way out. So the osteoblast, metabolically active bone cells in the periosteum and endosteum. They can be found as either osteogenic cells, that's these little flat ones here. They differentiate into osteoblasts when stimulated by specific chemical signals. So you've got the collagen fibers here, you've got the osteogenic cell, which are ultimately going to become the osteoblast cells as they differentiate. Notice it's changing shape, getting a little larger, and there's the full-grown osteoblast. These are bone-building cells. They perform bone deposition, which means they lay down new bone in the area. Bone deposition is the osteoclast secreting organic matrix materials, which excuse me, assists in the formation of the inorganic matrix. The osteocytes, the osteoblasts will eventually surround themselves with the matrix into small cavities called lacunae. These, once they have been completely surrounded by a lacunae, they are then osteocytes and are no longer actively synthesizing bone matrix. They no longer actively are metabolically active except for maintaining bone extracellular matrix. They appear to have the ability to recruit osteoblasts to build up and reinforce the bone under tension. So here is the osteocyte. This little structure right here that the osteocyte rests in would be called the lacunae. This is the extracellular matrix of the bone here. And again, the fluid in the lacunae. Again, bone cells moving from the osteogenic stage into the osteoblast stage. Osteoblasts then start to secrete the matrix. The matrix will eventually completely surround this cell, forming the lacunae, and at that point, those cells are then referred to as osteocytes. The osteoclast cells are responsible for bone absorption, or excuse me, bone resorption. The cells secrete hydrogen ions and certain enzymes which break down the bone matrix and release all of those minerals we talked about previously, the phosphorus, the magnesium, and primarily calcium. They have a completely different overall cell structure than the other two types. The osteoclast, a couple of important characteristics to remember. They are large and they are multinucleated cells. They resemble jellyfish. They have a large body and then lots of little tails hanging off of them. They are derived from the fusion of cells from the bone marrow. They will eventually locate themselves into shallow depressions on the internal and external surface of bone. The hydrogen ions that they release dissolves the components of the inorganic matrix. If you've ever seen hydrogen peroxide be dropped onto a wound or onto a floor and you see it bubbling, that's sort of the way the hydrogen breaks down the matrix. These liberated substances from the bone include nutrients, minerals, amino acids, and sugars. They will be absorbed by various transport methods in the osteoclast cytosol. Those will then be released into the blood, where they will either be reused or excreted from the body as waste materials. And there is an example of the osteoclast with its many, many nuclei. collagen fibers. It's releasing its hydrogen ions to cause the breakdown of all these other things. There you see hydrogen being released from the osteoclast, the amino acids, and the phosphorus, and the calcium, all of the sugars, all being resorbed from the bone tissue. Bone histology. We're going to talk about the way bone is made. This is the microscopic anatomy. When you looked in lab and you looked at bone tissue, this is what you would have looked at. Histology of the hard outermost compact bone and the porous inner spongy bone tissue are quite different. Both gross and histological differences can be attributed to their different functions. Again, structure, function, core principle. It's made the way it's made, so it can do the job it does. It can do the job it does because of the way it's made. So here's your compact bone on the outside with its very tightly aligned layers of osteocytes and lacunae. And then here's the spongy bone with its multiple void spaces for red bone marrow and all kinds of other things. The structure of the compact bone is continuously subjected to great deals of stress, tends to strain and deform objects like bone, must be able to withstand these forces or suffer damage. The compact bone cross-section resembles a forest of tightly packed trees. So if you want to, each one of these little circular structures called an osteon, if you wanted to use the analogy that each one of those was a tree growing in a forest, each tree is a unit called an osteon or a Haversian system. Rings in each tree are made up of thin layers of bone called lamellae. If you've heard of something being laminated, that's what a layer. If you're a carpenter, for instance, and you want to work with plywood, you know you can get plywood that has plywood is laminated, and it may have 7 layers or 9 layers or 12 layers, depending on the type of plywood you want to get. Each one of those layers then would be called a lamellae. The structure of an individual osteon will contain between 4 and 20 lamellae arranged in a ring. Think about the rings on a tree that, you know, at some point in your life, you've probably seen a picture of a tree stump and you can count, excuse me, how old the tree was by counting the number of rings or the number of lamellae. This arrangement is very stress resistant, so the osteon structure of the compact bone gives the stress resistance for the bone. Collagen fibers in neighboring lamellae run in different directions. That is a resist to twisting and bending from various directions. Again, back to my plywood analogy, if you were to cut a section of plywood and take it apart, you will see that the grain of one layer is going this way, but the next layer or the next lamellae, the grain is running this way. That's what gives plywood its strength, is those alternating layers. The central canal is the channel that runs down through the middle of the osteon. If you look back here, you see the red and blue vessels and the yellow nerve. That is running down through the central canal. It is lined with endosteum. It contains blood vessels and nerves that supply the bone. The osteocyte is found in, again, that little small chamber called the lacunae. These are small cavities between the lamellae filled with extracellular fluid. So if you look, here's an osteocyte, here's a lacunae there, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there. And in each one of those lacunae, there is an osteocyte. The neighboring lacunae are connected by a network of small passageway in the matrix called caniculi. That's those little hair-like structures. If you remember a couple of slides ago, we said that the osteocytes resemble jellyfish. If you've ever seen a jellyfish, there's the large sort of head-like thing with the little tails running off. The overall compact bone structure, the osteons, are not permanent structures. The osteoclast breakdown and osteoblasts rebuild the bone matrix depending on needs of the body, and leaves behind some characteristic features. These interstitial lamellae, the spaces between the circular osteons, represent remnants of old osteons. So you have an osteon here and an osteon here, but here you have this sort of triangular shaped area that's the leftover, and as these continue to move outward, you will eventually see, this component there. So the interstitial lamellae are what's left over after an old lamellae has been replaced by a newer one. Circumferential lamellae are the outer and inner layers of the lamellae just inside the periosteum, and they form the boundary with the spongy bone. They're there for adding strength. So the perforating channels, the central canals there. Perforating channels, again, here and here, originate from blood vessels in the periosteum. They travel at right angles to the central canals of neighboring osteons, connecting this one to this one, this one to this one, and this one to this one. It's connecting all these osteons. Again, there is the overall look at the histology, the artist rendering of a cross section of an area of diaphysis of the humerus. There is the whole cross section of the diaphysis. Here is blow up of a single osteon, showing the lamellae, the central canal, and then here is an actual transmission electron microscope, 620,000 times magnification, showing the central canal, the caniculae, the osteocytes in lacunae, and then all of the other structures. Spongy bone is usually not weight-bearing like compact bone. It's much less densely packed. It forms a network of struts that reinforces the compact bone. It resists forces from a variety of different directions, and it provides protective structure for the bone marrow. The bone marrow will be found in all these little void spaces. Each one of these little extension structures is called a trabeculae. Those are the struts or ribs of the bone. They are covered with endosteum. They are usually not arranged in osteons. They are composed of concentric lamellae with osteocytes and lacunae. They communicate through the caniculi. This is a cross section of this trabeculae right here, showing the osteocytes and lacunae, showing the osteoclasts, the osteoblasts. There's the caniculi connecting row to row, so everybody's connected. There is no central canal, no perforating canals, supplying blood to the trabeculae. It obtains its blood simply from the bone marrow. And again, there's the cross section. That is the head of some weird, very weird bone. I don't know a bone in the human body that has a head that looks like that. It looks kind of like the head of the femur, but it's pointed the wrong direction. But again, just showing the cross section, the spongy bone. Here we take this little square. Here's that little square magnified. And there's this section right here showing all the different components. Osteoporosis is marble bone disease. If you take all these subwords, it's defective osteoclasts. They don't properly degrade bone. They cause bone mass to increase. Yet the bones become weak and brittle because they are not correctly mineralized. There are two main forms of osteoporosis. There's infantile osteoporosis, which is predominantly inherited. It is the more severe form. Babies will be born with openings in the skull, and marrow cavities fail to enlarge with growth. Nerves get trapped, which can cause blindness and deafness. Decreased blood production. It can be fatal, but it must be treated with drugs to stimulate osteoclasts and red marrow. Adult osteoporosis also seems to be inherited. Develops during adolescence or later. The symptoms can be bone pain, recurrent fractures, nerve trapping again, joint pain. This is treated symptomatic only. This one, there are drugs that can help with this. This one, we just have to treat the symptoms, because once this issue is started, there's no way to bring it back. I'm going to stop there for this module, and I will pick up with another video here in a few minutes. Thank you very much.